you got a bunch of people there who love their job, and there's a responsibility in that. There has been over a number of years. You work with these people every day, and it only works when people want to be there. And I'm proud of being there for 17.
For nearly 2 decades, tens of millions of viewers welcomed Mark Harmon into their living rooms every week as Special Agent Leroy Jethro Gibbs, the steely, coffee-drinking heart of NCIS. But the man behind the badge has spent his entire life doing something far rarer in Hollywood than landing a hit show, staying almost completely out of the spotlight. Behind that famously guarded exterior is a story that runs from a Heisman-winning father's shadow to a stunning football upset most fans have never heard of, to a real-life burning car rescue, to nearly 40 years of a marriage built on total media silence. This is the real story of Mark Harmon, not the manufactured scandal, but the actual life. Thomas Mark Harmon was born on September 2, 1951, in Burbank, California, into a household that already carried enormous weight. His father, Tom Harmon, had won the Heisman Trophy in 1940 as a running back at the University of Michigan, flown as a decorated fighter pilot in World War II, and gone on to become one of the most recognizable sports broadcasters in the country. His mother, Elise Knox, was a successful actress and fashion designer who had appeared in dozens of films during the 1940s. Mark had 2 older sisters, Kelly and Kristen, both of whom would also step into the public eye in different ways. Harmon attended Harvard-Westlake, one of the Los Angeles area's well-known private schools, where he played football before the elbow injury that would reroute his path. Even at that stage, comparisons to his father were unavoidable. Tom Harmon's broadcasting career meant he was a familiar voice and face to sports fans across the country, and reporters covering Southern California high school football rarely resisted mentioning whose son was on the field. For Mark, that meant learning early how to perform under a level of scrutiny most teenagers never experience, a preview of the far larger spotlight that would eventually follow him into television. Growing up as the son of a national football legend meant Mark's own achievements were almost never allowed to simply be his own. They were measured against his father's legacy before he'd even had the chance to define himself. It's a dynamic that countless children of famous athletes describe. The sense that your name opens doors, but it also means every step you take gets compared to someone else's legacy. For Mark, that comparison would follow him first onto the football field and then unexpectedly onto film sets. Here's a detail that surprises most NCIS fans. Mark Harmon was, for a brief but genuinely impressive stretch, one of college football's rising stars, and he almost never got the chance. A broken elbow during his junior year of high school kept him off the varsity football field as a senior, which meant he wasn't recruited by a major program straight out of high school. Instead, he enrolled at Los Angeles Pierce College, a junior college in Woodland Hills, where he quarterbacked the team to a strong record and earned junior college All-America honors. That performance opened the door to bigger programs, and Harmon chose to stay close to home, transferring to UCLA in 1972. His impact was immediate and, for Bruins fans, unforgettable. In his very first game as UCLA's starting quarterback, he helped orchestrate a stunning upset over the 2-time defending national champion Nebraska Cornhuskers, one of the most celebrated upsets in the program's history. Over his 2 seasons as starter, running Coach Pepper Rogers' wishbone offense, Harmon led UCLA to a 17-5 record. He wasn't just a field general, either. Harmon graduated cum laude from UCLA in 1974 with a degree in communications, and he was honored with the National Football Foundation's Scholar Athlete Award, recognition reserved for players who combine serious athletic achievement with serious academic achievement. It's the kind of credential that quietly punctures the idea that he coasted on his father's name. By every account, he earned his own. With that resume, it would have been entirely reasonable for Harmon to pursue a shot at the NFL. Instead, according to his own later reflections, he considered paths like advertising or law before ultimately deciding to try acting. A decision that, on paper, looks almost impulsive, but which set the stage for one of television's longest-running leading man careers. Harmon has often pointed back to those UCLA seasons when explaining how he later approached the entertainment business. In interviews given decades afterward, he described himself as always a team guy, both as an athlete and as an actor, and credited his football years with instilling the discipline that let him treat a production set the way he'd once treated a locker room. as a place where showing up prepared and putting the group ahead of yourself mattered more than personal spotlight. That mentality would later be formally recognized. Pierce College inducted him into its inaugural Athletic Hall of Fame class, and the National Football Foundation has continued to honor him decades after his playing days ended, citing not just his performance on the field, but the way he carried that same sense of loyalty into his second career. The jump from college quarterback to working actor was not glamorous. Harmon spent his early years in Los Angeles taking small roles and working ordinary jobs to get by while he tried to break into the industry, an experience shared by countless actors who eventually make it and countless more who don't. His television debut came in the early to mid-1970s, and steady work followed through the rest of that decade and into the 1980s. His breakthrough came with a string of prominent television roles: Dr. Robert Caldwell on St. Elsewhere, Detective Dickie Cobb on Reasonable Doubts, and later Dr. Jack McNeil on Chicago Hope. Along the way, in 1986, People magazine named him Sexiest Man Alive, a title Harmon, true to form, treated with visible discomfort rather than fanfare. Friends and colleagues who worked with him during this era have often pointed to the same through line. He approached acting sets the way he'd approach the football field, showing up early, treating crew members as teammates, and avoiding the trappings of celebrity that so many of his peers embraced. Harmon's family life during these years was also shaped by his two older sisters, whose own paths through Hollywood looked very different from his measured, low-key approach. Kristen, later known as Kristen Nelson, married rock and roll star Ricky Nelson, and became part of one of the most publicly documented entertainment families of the era. Kelly Harmon, meanwhile, pursued acting and modeling and was for a time married to automobile executive John DeLorean. Watching two sisters navigate very public marriages and very public lives, while their own parents carefully managed a golden couple image for the outside world, appears to have reinforced in Mark an instinct to do the opposite, to keep as much of his own life as possible out of the public record. That instinct served him well as his career gained momentum through the late 1970s and 1980s. By the time he landed his first true star vehicle in St. Elsewhere, a prestige medical drama that became a launching pad for numerous well-known actors, Harmon had already developed a reputation within the industry as reliable, low drama, and intensely focused on the work rather than the attention that came with it. That reputation would carry him into the next, far bigger chapter of his career. On the evening of January 3, 1996, Mark Harmon's instincts were tested in a way no acting role ever could. A car carrying two teenage boys lost control near Harmon's home in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles, crashed through a fence, struck a tree, and flipped over before catching fire. The driver managed to escape with relatively minor injuries. His passenger, 16-year-old Colin Specht, was not so lucky. He was trapped inside the burning vehicle, upside down, with his seatbelt still fastened. According to Harmon's own account, it was his wife, actress Pam Dauber, who reached the scene first. She called for a sledgehammer. Harmon ran to get one and broke through the car's window, then pulled Specht, whose clothing had caught fire, out of the wreckage. Bystanders helped roll Specht on the pavement to put out the flames. A Los Angeles Fire Department spokesman later told reporters plainly, "The youths owed their lives to Harmon's actions." Specht suffered third-degree burns and spent months in the hospital recovering, but he survived, and decades later, he has spoken publicly about how certain he is that he wouldn't have made it out without Harmon's intervention. What stands out just as much as the rescue itself is what came after. Almost nothing. Harmon declined to make a media spectacle of the incident, consistently deflecting credit toward his wife for spotting the crash and calling for help in the first place. It was a glimpse of the same instinct that would come to define his entire public life: do the difficult thing, then step back out of the frame. Mark Harmon married Pam Dauber, then one of television's most recognizable stars from her lead role in Mork and Mindy, in March 1987. At the height of her own career, Dauber made the choice to step back from steady acting work to raise their two sons, Sean and Ty. What followed has become something close to legend in an industry defined by short marriages and public breakups. Nearly 4 decades together, almost entirely shielded from the press. The couple has been famously disciplined about keeping their private life exactly that, private. They rarely discuss their marriage or their children in interviews, kept their sons largely out of red carpet appearances and paparazzi photos during their upbringing, and have said little publicly about the inner workings of their relationship, even as tabloids periodically speculated about trouble. That restraint, sustained for this long, is genuinely unusual in Hollywood, and it appears to be a deliberate choice rather than an accident of low profile, given how famous both Harmon and Dauber were individually. Dauber, for her part, has occasionally spoken about the couple's approach in broad terms, describing a shared understanding that keeping their sons out of the industry machine as children was worth more than any career opportunity that came with public visibility. Neither she nor Harmon has ever laid out a detailed rulebook for how they manage this, but the pattern across decades of coverage is consistent. Interviewers who tried to ask about the marriage or the kids were generally met with polite but firm redirection back to whatever project was being promoted. It's a discipline that, by most accounts, both partners maintained equally rather than one enforcing it on the other. Their son Sean Harmon would go on to work behind the camera in the NCIS universe himself, eventually playing a younger version of Gibbs in flashback scenes, a detail that becomes especially relevant later in this story. In 2003, Harmon took on the role that would define the back half of his career, Special Agent Leroy Jethro Gibbs on NCIS, a spin-off of JAG. What began as a procedural drama turned into one of the most-watched shows on American television, running for close to 2 decades with Harmon anchoring nearly every episode as both star and executive producer. Producing and starring in roughly 24 episodes a year, year after year, is a genuinely grueling undertaking, one that Harmon has described in terms of team loyalty rather than personal stardom, frequently pointing to the hundreds of crew members whose livelihoods depended on the show's continued success. In one interview reflecting on the show's longevity, Harmon explained that he saw steady employment for the crew as one of the most meaningful parts of the job, pointing out that people on the production could plan family vacations or make a down payment on a boat because they knew months in advance that the show would be back in production. It's a small detail, but it's consistent with everything else about how he's described his working life. Less about his own celebrity, more about the machine of people around him who depended on the show's success. The role earned Harmon a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in October 2012, along with years of award nominations. Off-camera, he became known for quietly supporting a range of charitable causes, including Stand Up to Cancer, the Entertainment Industry Foundation, and organizations supporting children and families, rarely drawing attention to that work the way some of his peers might have. No honest account of Harmon's NCIS years can skip over his falling out with co-star Polly Parrott, who played forensic scientist Abby Ciuto for 15 seasons. But it's worth being precise about what is actually confirmed versus what remains allegation, because a lot of coverage blurs that line. Here's what multiple sources, including on-the-record comments from NCIS executive producer Charles Floyd Johnson, agree happened. At some point during production, a dog belonging to Harmon, a rescue dog he regularly brought to the dog-friendly set, bit a crew member seriously enough to require stitches. Despite the incident, Harmon reportedly continued bringing the dog to set. Parrott, an outspoken animal welfare advocate, raised safety concerns with the show and with CBS. Over time, the two co-stars stopped filming scenes together, reportedly not sharing a set for roughly the final 2 years of Parrott's run, with editing techniques used to make it appear on screen as though their characters still interacted. Parrott left the show in 2018 after 15 seasons. In the aftermath, she posted a series of tweets alleging she had experienced multiple physical assaults during her time on the show and said she was too afraid of Harmon to ever return, adding that she had nightmares about it. According to later reporting, sources described the specific allegation as a 2017 incident in which Parrott claimed Harmon body-checked her, which she reportedly believed was retaliation for her having pushed to keep his dog off set. Harmon has never publicly responded to or confirmed these allegations. CBS acknowledged that Parrott had raised a workplace concern and said the matter was addressed, without detailing what that resolution involved. In short, the dog bite incident and the resulting rift are well documented and effectively undisputed. The assault allegation is real, publicly made by Parrott herself, and taken seriously by the network, but it remains an allegation that Harmon has not addressed on the record, and it should be reported as such rather than as settled fact. By his late 60s, decades of physical demands, first from college football, then from 2 decades of long, physically taxing production days, had visibly caught up with Harmon. Fans noticed a change in his appearance during the later seasons of NCIS, which fueled online speculation about his health. There's no public confirmation that Harmon was seriously ill. What is documented is that a man in his late 60s was carrying the physical toll of an extraordinarily demanding, decades-long work schedule, on top of the ordinary wear of aging. In 2021, during the fourth episode of the show's 19th season, Harmon's character exited the series, written out through a storyline that sent Gibbs to Alaska, ultimately choosing to stay there rather than return to Washington. It closed out 18 seasons in the role, one of the longest-running lead performances in American television history. Harmon's NCIS years were also marked by real personal grief that he handled the same way he handled everything else, privately. In September 2016, longtime NCIS showrunner Gary Glassberg, a close creative partner of Harmon's for years, died suddenly in his sleep at 50. In 2023, Harmon's longtime co-star David McCallum, who had played medical examiner Dr. Donald Ducky Mallard for 2 decades, died at 90, closing out one of the show's most beloved original partnerships. In both cases, Harmon avoided the kind of elaborate public tribute that's become standard practice for celebrities on social media, opting instead for brief, understated statements. It's consistent with everything else about how he's handled his public life. Grief, like everything personal, stayed largely out of view. Harmon's connection to Gibbs didn't end when he left the main show. In 2024, CBS greenlit a prequel series, NCIS Origins, set in the early 1990s and exploring a young Gibbs in the years following the death of his first wife and daughter, the formative trauma that shaped the character fans had watched for 2 decades. Notably, the concept reportedly originated with Harmon's own son, Sean, who had previously portrayed the younger Gibbs in flashback sequences on the original series. Father and son pitched the project together, and Mark Harmon stepped into the role of narrator and executive producer rather than returning in front of the camera full-time. Actor Austin Stoll was cast to play the young Gibbs, working directly with Harmon to capture the character's mannerisms and voice. The prequel has continued into further seasons, giving Harmon a way to remain creatively connected to the character and franchise that defined his career, without returning to the grueling schedule of a network lead. Since stepping back from full-time acting, Harmon has turned to a new pursuit: writing. Partnering with Leon Carroll Jr., a retired real-life NCIS agent who served as a technical advisor on the show, Harmon has co-authored a series of nonfiction military history and true crime books focused on real naval intelligence operations, including Ghosts of Honolulu and later installments in the same series. The partnership makes sense given how much of Harmon's decades on NCIS involved working alongside real investigators and technical advisors to keep the show's procedural details grounded. Turning that same collaboration toward nonfiction storytelling about real agents' cases was, by his own description, a natural extension of the research he'd already been doing for years as an actor and producer. The book series has let Harmon stay connected to the world of naval intelligence and investigative storytelling without the grueling weekly production schedule that defined his acting career. It has also given him a public role that fits his temperament. Promoting a book tour is a far cry from the constant tabloid exposure of a long-running network drama, and it allows him to speak about subject matter, real historical events and real agents' work, rather than his own personal life. Beyond that, by most accounts, Harmon has largely done exactly what he spent his entire career trying to protect. Retreated into a private life with Pam Dauber, away from red carpets, industry events, and the media apparatus he spent decades keeping at arm's length. Strip away the tabloid packaging, and Mark Harmon's actual story doesn't need embellishment to be compelling. It's the story of a man who grew up permanently compared to a famous father, who built his own credentials on a football field most of his fans have never heard about, who ran toward a burning car when he didn't have to, who built and protected a nearly 40-year marriage in an industry that chews through relationships, and who handled both a genuine workplace conflict and real personal grief the same way, quietly, and mostly out of view. That's not a story of hidden scandal. It's a story about a man who decided, early and consistently, that his private life wasn't public property, and who spent 50 years in the spotlight making that choice stick. Whatever comes next for him, whether more books, more work on NCIS Origins, or simply more quiet years with his family,